All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Evelyn Santiago. I am the Executive Director of ARNEC. I am pleased to welcome you to ARNEC's webinar series on young children amidst COVID-19. This webinar series aims to provide a platform for the regional ECD community to discuss how this pandemic is affecting our young children and their families in this region. The country presentations we are featuring in these webinars are meant to provide you with some approaches, solutions, and innovations which we hope can be adapted to your respective context as you design and redesign your ECD programs to respond to the impact of this COVID-19 pandemic. Topics for the webinar series focus on the issues that young children and their families and caregivers are facing at a time when governments enforce strict measures to stop the spread of the coronavirus, and what the ECD community might learn from partners implementing practical strategies and innovations at the country level. Today is already the third webinar in this series. The first one held on April 13 focused on practical strategies for the most vulnerable young children and their families. The second webinar held last week tackled tips and approaches to take care of the caregivers as they look after young children under prolonged homestay as one of the containment measures to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Succeeding webinar sessions in this series will cover topics related to distance learning approaches for young children, exploring the power of play in building resilience of young children and families at home, issues of child protection during crisis, which would include issues against children against abuse and violence at home, protecting the most vulnerable children, including refugees, the displaced, homeless, street children, children in institutions, among others. We will also look at strategies and practices to support the ECD workforce in one of our webinars. And we will look at some issues that we need to consider as we recover into the new normal. What is the role of ECD in building preparedness and resilience among young children and families? Today's webinar, entitled Understanding How Young Children Cope with Stress, Fear, and Anxiety During Crisis, such as COVID-19, will be moderated by Dr. Nilima Chopra, a senior fellow at Center for Early Childhood Development and Research, Jamia Millia Islamia in New Delhi, India. Nilima is also one of ARNEC's national representatives for India. For the past 15 years, she has been working in the areas of child development and early learning in a multicultural environment. Thanks, Nilima, for agreeing to moderate this webinar, and over to you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you very much for providing this useful context to the ARNEC webinar series. And I would also like to thank ARNEC for providing this wonderful opportunity to learn and share through these webinars. I take this opportunity to welcome and thank all our panelists and other attendees to the third webinar organized by ARNEC on young children amidst COVID-19, how young children cope with anxiety, fear, and stress. UNESCO estimates that about 1.5 billion children are at home due to the stay-at-home directive and subsequently closing of all the schools and other childcare institutes and centers. Now, this has resulted in disruptions in the daily routines for children, like going out to the outdoors for play, meeting friends and neighbors, visiting extended family, grandparents, and so on. And this disruption in children's routines leads to a lot of anxiety and stress among children. And the constant news on the television, on social media, and all the discussions, even in the family related to the coronavirus infections, plus maybe the financial insecurities, especially in the disadvantaged communities, all this feeds into the anxiety and stress and the fear felt by the young children. So we have our team of experts and our panelists who will help in providing answers to some of the questions for today's webinar. The important ones being what changes in behavior among young children are apparent or emerging under prolonged periods of home quarantine. So, how can we identify the signs of distress or changes in behavior of young children caused due to the disruptions that we see? The other important question that the webinar aims to, have discussions on is what are the practical strategies that parents and caregivers provide their young children to address adverse changes in behavior, while very important, while also looking after their own well-being. So I hope we are all we are all looking forward to an interesting presentation and discussion related to this important theme. But before I start, let me share a few general reminders with our participants. The If we can flash the general reminders on the screen. The webinar is recorded and the recording will be shared with you in a day or so. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you will find a chat box. Please introduce yourself in this, type your name, organization. There is another feature called the Q&A. Use this feature to type in your questions. Our panelists and experts will answer these questions. You can also upvote a question by giving a thumbs up to it. There's also, you can attend our next webinar by becoming the ARNEC member. And also, we would request you to share your feedback related to the webinar by completing the survey that will be posted to you after the webinar is over. So now for the introductions of our esteemed and distinguished panelists. Our first panelist is Professor Mark D. Rosnay. He is the current professor and academic head of early start at the University of Wollongong in Australia. Mark's research focuses on emotional development in early childhood, with particular emphasis on the ways that young children understand emotions. I welcome you, Mark. Thank you for being here. The second presentation is supporting children and parents during COVID-19, the My First School Singapore Way. Now, this presentation is being presented to us by two experts, Ms. Aileen from My First School and Dr. Connie Lung. Aileen is the general manager of My First School by NTUC First Campus, a network of 145 childcare centers in Singapore, serving some 20,000 children. They have an after-school program for primary school children. And Dr. Connie is the Director, Mother Tongue Languages Officer of NTUC First Campus. She has worked in the field of early childhood education for over 20 years and holds a degree in education from the University of Western Australia. She also closely works with principals and teachers delivering the Chinese curriculum and programs to children. I welcome both Aileen and Dr. Connie. Then we have our third presentation is from Vietnam by Dr. Thiong. He's from Plan International Vietnam, and he is talking about addressing children's stress and fears under the COVID-19 pandemic through the efforts of Plan Vietnam. And Thiong has been the technical lead for health and nutrition of Plan Vietnam since 2018. He is involved in developing the strategic program framework of the organization on health, nutrition, and ECD, designing new projects and programs. I welcome you, Thiong, on this platform. Our fourth presentation is by Nikki Rees. She's presenting on supporting the needs of caregivers to create a safe home environment for young children in the time of COVID-19. Nikki has been working in the field of family life and child development since 2012. Currently, she is a planning officer assigned to the Policy and Programs Unit of ECCD Council of the Government of the Republic of the Philippines. So I formally welcome all the panelists and I thank them for their time. And I think now it's time for our first presentation. We are all very eager to hear Professor Mark talk about his presentation, and I hand it over to Mark.
Okay, well, I hope that I'm coming through loud and clear. Nalima, thank you for the introduction. Let me know if there's any technical difficulties while I'm talking. Let me just say a really strong thank you to ARNEC and the Secretariat for organising this. I think it's a great paradox, isn't it, that we're all more physically isolated, but for many of us, it's actually causing us to become more socially connected internationally, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I'm going to talk today about the impact of COVID-19 on young children's social emotional development. I'm going to do that my talk has 3 parts, and I only have 15 minutes, so I want to give a very high level kind of set of considerations. First of all, I want to talk about what the foundations of social emotional development are, and keep those in mind, because of course COVID-19 will have different impacts for different children in different places, in different families. There's no one way of understanding the impact of COVID-19, but we all agree and we recognize that in this environment, we have to take different things into consideration. There'll be new pressures, new living arrangements, and these will impact children profoundly. The second thing I want to talk about is what I would call, what is our conception of the child? So how do we think about children? Because like it or not, how we think about children informs how we respond to them, how we interact with them. If we think a 1-year-old is a intelligent social participant, we tend to give them consideration. We tend to watch their signals and interpret them in light of the fact that we think they're trying to say something. But if we think they're a child without language, we might not talk to them. So how we think about a child makes a very big difference to how we respond. And then I'm going to discuss in the third part of the talk through what I call 3 big ideas. And these ideas are really oriented to the topic, which is adapting ourselves to this environment. And I'm going to talk about observation, structure, and communication as very powerful tools for people who are looking after, caring for, and working with children. And I'll say a little bit about the pointy end when children's behaviour is very upsetting or their questions are very difficult to respond to. So I hope that's clear. So what are the foundations of social emotional development? I think it's fair to say that we can say relationships and interactions are at the heart. So here I've got a picture of my own family, of the intergenerational sharing of attachment relationships. I suppose I could have inserted myself there, but it would have looked a bit silly with me sitting on my mother's lap. But here we can see how a child is born into a social system, and hopefully that's a loving and caring system. But a child is not just something that we care for. A child is a person. A child is someone who wants to interact. They want to engage with us. And so this is a beautiful picture from that book by Lynn Murray and Liz Andrews back in 2001, showing this very rich interaction between Helen and William. And he's a very, very young baby. I think he's about 3 or 4 weeks of age. And there's timing, and there's affect recognition, and there's pleasure, and there's sustained attention in this interaction. So let me talk first about attachment. I think of attachment, and I think many developmental researchers do, as the foundational relationships. Attachment is a universal phenomenon, and it is what I would consider a need. I think that's the right way to think about it. You can think of it as a biological and psychophysiological system. I think about it as a need. Children need to feel safe and secure, and attachment is the forum in which this occurs, where a loving caregiver does their best. Not perfectly, but they do their best to provide for the needs of that child. And that person is typically the mother, although other people can step up and do that. Let me just expand a couple of ideas about attachment, because I think it's an idea that we all find intuitively very appealing. But when we dig under the surface, there are some nuances and facets of attachment relationships that people overlook. So I would say that attachment forms the basis of our sense of safety and security. Now, of course, other things impact our sense of safety and security as well. You know, if we're living in conflict, or if we're very short of resources, or our temperament might make us a more fearful person. But we are social animals and quintessentially connected in a codependent way to other people. And when we've had healthy and strong attachment relationships, we feel safety and security in those relationships. We take comfort from those relationships, and we seek those relationships out when we're under stress, when we have a need to reassure ourselves that the world is still a safe place in which to operate, or at least some aspects of the world are still safe. Attachment provides us also, and this is, I suppose, the bit of attachment that I find myself most emphasizing to students very often. It's a foundation from which to explore a potentially dangerous world. Now, I don't want to give the sense that everything out there is dangerous. I don't want to stoke anxiety, but think of monkeys. They have attachment relationships too. And what those relationships ensure is that when the infant monkey or the group of monkeys sense any sort of danger, that baby very rapidly seeks out his or her primary attachment figure, and that attachment figure provides safety and security in a very real and tangible sense. But we can expand this idea, and I think it's worth reflecting on this for a second. People who use attachment constructs in their work often think about the safety and the safety that the attachment figure gives. And in early childhood, we do, at least in Australia, and I know in some other countries, we do talk about children having attachments to their caregivers, to the educators, and to their teachers, which I think is correct. But why is that so important? Why is this principle enshrined, for example, in Australia in the early years learning framework? We talk about the being, belonging, and becoming. A child has to feel safe and secure in their learning environment. And the reason for that is we know from decades of observation and experience, and also from research, that when children feel safe and secure, they're more open to learning, to exploring, to taking on new information and experiences. And it's through challenging themselves in the environment that they grow and change and develop a sense of autonomy and independence. And that's really vital to their growing social and emotional competence. So the second foundational area of social emotional development is what I would call interactions. So that is learning through and learning with others. So I'll just quickly go over some key ideas to refresh them perhaps. I'm sure many of these ideas are familiar to a lot of you already. I would say the infant and young child is built to learn through interactions with others. And so here you can see me having an interaction with my daughter when she was, I think, 90 minutes old. And she was full term gestationally, and she had a normal, non-traumatic birth. She was relaxed and she was ready to engage with this new and fascinating world and sustain those interactions for over 10 minutes. And I didn't see that in all my children, but it drives home a point, which is that very quickly communicative interactions begin between infants and their caregivers, and they can quickly become dyadic. And by that, what I mean, and Colwyn Trevathan, of course, has been arguing this since the 70s and maybe before, that babies can take a role, they can take initiative and leadership in these interactions. And for them to be able to do that means they must have a conception of you as a person with whom they can have an interaction. And so this is absolutely foundational to early child development, and it's also foundational to social and emotional development, because it's in these early interactions and relationships that babies start to experience themselves as effective, as intentional. They get messages back about themselves as being worthwhile. They are able to follow their interests and find those supported. And so it is absolutely foundational. I also wanted to emphasize this other point, just to perhaps remind people or drive home a message that people may not have stopped to think about. Long before infants can talk, they learn about the world from other people. So a classic way of thinking about this is what we call indexicality. The child is able to point at things even before they can name them. And by pointing, the child is showing us that they are aware of something, that they're interested in it, and they want to share that interest with us, social referencing. And between about 9 and 12 months, infants are doing this kind of referential communication. So that is, they're no longer learning about the world directly through their own activity on the world. They're no longer learning about people directly through their own interactions with people, but they're also looking to people to give them information about the world. And that is a real change. And of course, this is fundamental to language development. And what we know, and I'll just emphasize this point, is that the architecture of language is in place by the end of the first year. And infants' receptive language far outstrips their productive ability. So long before a child can say something back to us, they are aware of much of the content of what we are sharing with them. So that brings me to what I call the conception of the child. And my question to you is, do you think it matters how we think about the child? I obviously do, and I'm going to talk about why I think that's a good way to structure our responses to children. So here in these images, I've tried to characterize a highly enculturated view of the infant. It's just a canvas for my need to find it a cute and interesting thing and to bring it up in my own image, I suppose. On the left-hand side, you see that sort of Piagetian conception of the child's intellect as something impenetrable and stuck inside its mind. It has to work itself out, and the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. So let me just share this graphic with you, which is what I often use in teaching and what people often expect to see when we're dealing with a question like the impact of COVID-19 on young children's social emotional development. Within developmental science, developmental psychology, educational science, we tend to view children as being organisms who have these forces acting on them and these capacities, and depending on the peculiar mix of their genes, their environment, and their opportunities, they have more or less negative outcome, more positive or more negative outcomes. And so people like myself spend their time studying early experience and social influences. We might be interested in epigenetics, temperament, constitution, the influence of genes, other environmental factors such as pollutants, etc. And then we have a conception of the child, and we often think of the child in sort of in that classical split as child as a thinker and child as a feeler. I like to put that this way, that we can think of the child as someone who understands the world. That's the cognitive side. And we can think of the child as someone who experiences the world directly, and that's more where we're dealing with affect and emotion. But of course, those distinctions all break down. And so when you're asked, someone like me is asked to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on children's social and emotional development, we might often say something like, well, if the child has a fearful temperament and they're under great environmental stress and they don't have good social support networks, they're likely to interpret the world in this way and they're more likely to have negative outcomes. So this is a kind of a research paradigm translated into an insight, and often it's not very insightful and not very helpful. I think for the purposes of understanding, even in an evidence-based way, how we can respond to children and support them in a time of COVID-19 and understand them, this is a better conceptualization of the child. So I've said here the conception of the young child that supports development is as a person, a whole person, with his or her own point of view, relationships, interests, and experiences. This child is someone who can quickly make his or her own contribution to social activity, and I mean in the first 3 months of life, and take an interest in or find motivation in his or her own pursuits, as well as the pursuits of others. This child is inherently intelligent and socially switched on. If we think about the child this way, we interact with them in ways that support their social and emotional development. So let me now come to these 3 big ideas: observation, structure, and communication. I think anyone working in early childhood, whether in education, whether in social services, or whether in research, understands the incredible power of observation. And this is a slide here from Colwyn Trevarthen's work, where he discovered the beautiful synchronicity that occurs in interactions between infants and the mothers. And this other diagram here is, image here is from a high scope classroom in New Jersey, where myself and my colleagues visited in 2018. And for those of you in early childhood, you might be familiar with the high scope program. But one of the great merits of high scope is the way that it helps children through external environmental structure and planning and temporal structure. It helps the child internalize those aspects of structure so they become more autonomous and independent. So I've just chosen those two representations of these ideas. So first of all, observation. Observation, as I've said, is a foundation for understanding children and the impact of our actions on children. Now we can, if I just share some key ideas, I think is probably best. And this graphic here, this image here is from Lynn Murray and Colwyn Trevarthen's work in the 80s. And what they were observing was how the mother's availability impacts the child's behavioural organisation. And it's quite dramatic, I hope you'll agree. We can see through our observation that when the mother is unresponsive on the right-hand side, it has a profoundly disorganising impact on the baby's behaviour. Now that's unresponsiveness. In the bottom left-hand corner, she's just being interrupted by another social partner. And here the baby is not disorganised. Here the baby is patient and waiting. So observation is a great way to start to get a feel for how babies and young children are experiencing the world. And we should trust our interpretation of the meaningfulness of these signals. The baby on the right-hand side, both the top and the bottom image, is not happy. And we should be able to see that in their behaviour. It should make sense to us. So what I've said is we can learn a great deal about children by taking a step back and observing their actions, listening to their questions, and giving them room to express themselves through play and other activities. We can also learn a great deal about children and ourselves by reflecting on the impact of our own behaviours and communications on them. And that's what this illustration on the right-hand side illustrates in quite a dramatic way. But observation is not a magic tool. It doesn't give us some sort of magical insight into the child's mind. Rather, what good observation does, it helps us ask questions. It helps us ask good questions about how children are interacting with and understanding the world. So if we come to the COVID-19 world that we're currently in, we can use observation as a powerful tool to see the world from a child's point of view. So usually, children will be around people that have some knowledge of them. They'll have a foundation of observation, of experience with a child. If you step back and watch a child's behaviour, you can if you have that foundation, you can pretty quickly realise if there are aspects of their behaviour which are unusual or troubling. Are they distressed? Are they perseverating? Are they sticking on one topic and not going back to their normal routine of play and interaction? Are they have they become unresponsive or sullen or quiet? Have they regressed in their behaviour? All of this information is available to us through careful observation and mindful, reflective observation of the child. And it is meaningful, and it is a window on how to think about the child. The next idea, the big idea, is structure. And I'm not suggesting that all children have to have incredibly highly structured lives. I'm not saying that. But structure is a mechanism to establish a sense of safety and security and give children a sense of control. It's very important for social and emotional development. Young children are building up their self-regulatory abilities and their autonomy. And these things, self-regulatory ability and autonomy, are very, very important facets of social emotional competence. A child who knows how to regulate him or herself, knows how to act autonomously, has, we would say, a stronger sense of social emotional competence. Now, by providing children with appropriate and predictable structures, and this is at many levels, it's not just the environment, and this picture shows an environment, but it's actually in terms of relationships, routines, and environments. By providing children that, we support their sense of safety and security and their emerging capacity to take responsibility for their own activities. If you look at this picture carefully, I don't know if you can see my arrow here, but along the bottom here is a series of pink, on the bottom of the floor, there's a series of pink cards. What those pink cards do is they show the children in this educational program what to expect in the course of every day. So the child has a visual representation that helps them structure themselves, and it helps them build up good expectations about when to engage in certain things, how to disengage, how to think about what's coming next, and so on and so forth. When children feel confident about the structures that support them, then we can give them more autonomy and self-determination. So in an environment like this, you know, children, when they start in this environment, it's highly structured by the environment. By the time they're halfway through the year, the educators are relying on the children to structure themselves because they know how to rely on the environment as a place where they can act. And this builds up a sense of resilience in children, that they are able to act, that they are able to be effective. And in a COVID-19 world, many of the core structures that children depend on may have been violated or threatened. So it's a priority to restore these as best we can. There are things we can't change or affect, but there are many things that we can. So, you know, some children will have lost access to an early childhood service, or a grandparent with whom they spend time and who structures their world in a certain kind of way. In the home, we can recapitulate, we can reinvent some of this structure with a child. We can talk to them, if they're sophisticated enough, about what they want to do. We can build up a visual representation. We can just be the adult. We can start by just imposing the structure and then observing and seeing how the child responds to that. We can, even if they can't be with grandma, perhaps she might have been one of their primary caregivers, we can just have a touch base, or maybe if we can't even do that through some digital media, we could write a letter to grandma every day just to update her, or maybe do a drawing for her. And so these structures put back into the child a sense that they have the capacity to act, and there is a dependable and safe world for them to rely on. I would just make one other point here, I suppose, in that a lot of children will have lost access to the environment of other children, and this will affect their school readiness. So that's something that I think communities need to think about. Preschool, that year before formal schooling, all those opportunities in different cultures and communities do different ways, but the access to groups of other children, social partners, is a great preparation for school. And of course, in a COVID world, many children may be denied this. So we need to be mindful of that. We need to adapt our schools, if insofar as we can, to acknowledge that. And we need to give children a bit more time and space to build up their skills and their autonomy. So the last aspect is communication. So communication, I think of communication as the tools we have to understand each other, to express our needs, commune through shared experience, and learn about the world. So young children become better at understanding people and building up models of other people. And they get more knowledge about what motivates people, what they think, what they care about, what their desires are, and so on and so forth. But the way they think about people is fundamentally, at a very core level, the same as us. So more than anything else, and there's very good research on this, it is our shared communicative interactions alongside the child's language development. Those two things, our communicative interactions and the child's language development, and they are separate things. So just reflect on that for a second. These two things, more than anything else, enable children to develop a sophisticated understanding of others. Now, that implies that the time we spend with children and the opportunities we give them are highly important to their social and emotional development. And indeed, that is borne out in the literature. Young children are strongly influenced by the characteristics of the people around them and the ways in which those people interact with them. Now, go back to that conception of the child that I gave you. If you think about the child as having his or her own interests and their own point of view, you stop and you listen and you wait and you observe, because there's another person there who's trying to communicate something to us, or is trying to be understood. And those are the default settings, or the attitudes or the dispositions that really help children. In a COVID-19 world, communication is a key tool to both transmit information and help children come to terms with a complex world. And the characteristics and behaviors of the people children communicate with are just as important as what they say. Remember this, we can't give children satisfactory answers to all their questions. Your average 4-year-old will not understand what a germ is and how a virus operates. What they need is a person who they can keep going back to when they have another question or something they're uncertain about, or they want to explore an idea in their play. And it's over time, having access to people who are responsive, that children can rely on and depend on to build up a richer and more causal conception of the world. So I did just want to wrap up by saying something about what I call the pointy end. And I direct you to this wonderful article in the Washington Post, which is quite confronting, but I think really written by someone who understands and cares about children. So it's very confronting to deal with children's hard questions. And here is one. What happens if you die, Daddy? Or if Daddy dies? That's a hard question. And it's also very hard when children have upsetting behaviours. Maybe they're aggressing and doing things that we don't want them to do. There's no perfect solution to these kinds of situations, but just like you, a child deserves to have his or her concerns and questions taken seriously. They mustn't be pushed away as if they're something for another day. It's difficult to know how to respond, and some of the questions are scary, but and like I said, there's no perfect way of responding, but here are some good things to remember with that I'll finish off on. Understanding in children takes time, and many children, all children, need to revisit things again and again. So the way we set ourselves up in a trusting, communicative relationship is more valuable than the particular thing we say on a particular occasion. It's having that person they know they can go back to. It's important to be honest and to reassure children in ways that are authentic. And it's also important to try not to burden them with your own anxieties, but rather to give them a framework to think about what's going on and to express themselves and to give them some sort of mental model of how that we might get through this and that everything is going to be all right. The social emotional development for children is a journey. It's not a specific set of teaching moments. And we serve children best when we stand next to them and they trust us to provide them with care and information that helps them come to terms with the world as it is, not as we want it to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think that was a very informative, wonderful presentation, and the information about, how we need to perceive children as active beings, as socially intelligent beings, and how to provide for that supporting and nurturing environment for them. That is the crucial, these are the two crucial, important points that you've mentioned among the others. And I would just like to, I was just going through the question and answers from our participants, and, one or two really kind of struck a little chord with me, and they've been asked repeatedly. So I thought I'll just pose one or two questions to you at this point of time, and then we can continue with our the other presentations. And a question which has been asked, and we all are, kind of as parents, as teachers, as ECT practitioners, we are facing that a number of children are online. They are pursuing. There's an increase in online time, and our attendees, they are inquiring about how does this impact have an impact on their social emotional development. If you can, have a little. Throw a little light on that. How do we manage the socio-emotional development while the ongoing on-screen time?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Can you hear me clearly? Is it all coming through well?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, that's a great question. And I think the first and most important thing to say is that not all online time is made equal. So there are ways for children to be online which pose no threat to their social and emotional development and which we can use to support their development. But there are other ways of being online which are very disorganizing for children, expose them to threats, present them with information that we may not want them to see, and so on and so forth. And then there's this kind of uncomfortable territory, which is, we all sometimes need a break. The child has the device, how much are we relying on that? And in doing so, how much are we undermining the social and emotional skills that the child has to develop? So I think with young children in a COVID world, or in any sort of isolation, we have to accept that children are going to be online more than they normally would. And there are very good guidelines from the WHO around how much screen time children should have, and young children shouldn't spend too much time on screens. But if we accept that they're going to be spending more time on screens because of the circumstances and because of the family needs, like parents might need to work, then we should be thinking carefully about how they are online, what content they're consuming, and who's sitting next to them, who's talking to them, who's checking in with them. You know, all those sorts of peripheral things turn out to be extremely important. So I think we shouldn't be fearful of children interacting in online environments. We should try to be informed, and we should put good limits and structures around it. So I go back to my presentation, I talked about structure. There are even times, especially when we're all under pressure, we're housebound perhaps, or parents need to carve out moments where they need to get some work done or take care of, you know, pressing issues in the family or the house, where we might say, I'm going to plan for this time. This is, you can do this, you know, but put a narrative around that with a child. Say, okay, you've done, we did lots of physical things today. We did some cooking, we did some reading. Now what I want you to do is just relax and watch a show that you like while I do something else. And you know what? I'm going to get your big brother or your big sister to come and sit next to you. Just by putting that narrative around it, where we're structuring this activity and not sending the child a message that this is a way you manage yourself when there's nothing else there for you. The way we talk to children and structure their thinking helps them build up a conception of the proper place of things. So there are quite a few elements to that question that you asked, and I think every family and context will have to resolve it separately. But I think there are some strong principles there that we can work from.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think that was really helpful, and I'm sure we have more questions for you later on. I would now like to call in our next presenter, Ailing, and Dr. Connie Loon, and they are talking about supporting children and parents during COVID-19. The My First School Way experience.
Thank you for this opportunity to connect with everyone. My name is Ling. I'm actually joined by another colleague of mine. She's Connie. We both work for NTUC First Campus. I'm the general manager for My First School, and of course After School, which is a student care service. And Connie is the director for our mother tongue curriculum development. This afternoon, following Mark's kind of overview of, you know, how would children respond and cope with anxieties, fears, and stress amidst COVID-19. This afternoon, bringing forth a very practical lens, we hope to share with you some of our responses and some of the support structures that we had put in place to support children, and not just children, but also their families, because we know that young children, they don't operate independently, they operate through their families. So we want to make sure that families are also well supported to be able to cope well during these difficult times. My First School, as Nimala shared earlier, we are a childcare brand and network. We have some 145 centers in Singapore today, and we continue to add centers every year. In fact, upcoming, I have 3 more large centers being added to the entire network. Our presence in Singapore cuts across various typologies. So we have ourselves situated mainly in public housing spaces so that we can offer accessible, very convenient childcare services for our families. We also have them in shopping malls where they are usually a confluence of transport nodes so that parents find it very easy before they go to work and after they come back from work to pick up their children and head homes. And of course, we have started our footprint also in integrated hubs as well as standalone childcare centers. Our current largest center is actually a 1,000 children early year center. This center serves children aged 2 months, as young as 2 months, all the way to 4 years old. Today, we serve some 20,000 children and their families, and we have some 4,500 staff with us. So you can imagine when COVID happens, it was really quite a big challenge for us because we have many young families to look after. We have also many staff to look after. So the COVID situation has indeed, as what Mark has already, I think, clarified and painted that picture for us, has indeed brought about quite a new normal for all of us, not just adults, but also for our children. Our children now have to experience many changes as we implement precautionary measures across their lives. So from being able, from the left side that you can see the two photos that I put there, from being able to be in groups, being able to go outdoors easily, be able to talk to each other. Today they have to practice safe distancing. They wear masks when they have to be in centers or when they head out of their homes. They stay in very much smaller groups, groups of no more than 10 if possible. These are but the very few many changes they have to make. So you can imagine with every change, stress and anxieties will definitely be set up. Hence, we are very, very aware and very, very sensitive that beyond the physical kind of measures that we have to put in to keep them safe, we have to do more for their holistic well-being, which includes some of the things that Mark talked about earlier, the mental, the psychosocial well-being, and so on. So since the COVID-19 situation started, we, as educators, we tend to spend a lot of time talking about some of the learning, making sense of the world for our young children. So at that point of time, our teachers have actually been repeatedly, working, looking at various ways to share with children what does it mean when there is a COVID situation, and hence in return, as an outcome, what can they do to support themselves, to look out for themselves, their friends, their families, the whole idea of maintaining personal hygiene, social responsibility to protect themselves and everyone else. We also understand that actually children, because they actually listen and see very well, they would start to have many, many questions. They will have questions about what the COVID situation is all about. And parents will be then wondering, what can I say to my children? What should I say? How much should I say? So we thought, we can't just leave that situation out there and leave parents to decide from the newspapers, from news channels, how much they want to give to their children. So what we did was that, knowing that we need to respond to our children's reactions in supportive ways, we explore various ways. And one of the way that we feel that a situation like COVID can actually present invaluable teaching moments for teachers, for parents, and even caregivers, grandparents, extended family members, to talk and to learn alongside our young children. And I think at that point, not all adults would also understand what the whole COVID situation is all about. So everyone is learning alongside. So we wanted to create this very special bilingual book. And in Singapore, we are generally using English as the main communication language, but all our children will learn a mother tongue, whether it's Chinese, Malay, or Tamil. So we created this e-reader so that our parents will find it useful. And at the bottom of this slide, you will find that link. If you're interested, you can download this e-reader on your own as well. We wanted an e-reader because we know that the COVID situation is a very dynamic one. It changes from day to day, it changes from week to week. Even the term itself, COVID, came much later, right? Earlier, it was known as another type of virus. So we wanted to make sure that we can use an e-reader instead, so that we can continue to keep and share latest updates and developments with our children and our parents, so that facts is presented to them. They are then more assured with the correct facts that are being presented to them. And our teachers, our parents have actually leveraged on this ebook. We have them read online, we have them read on their mobile devices. We can also then, for the very, very young children, print it out, as you can see from the image there, a very, very large picture, so that young children, and tactile experience, they are able to manage this. And we hope that through the book, they can better understand the COVID outbreak through this engaging story, and also familiar images. Through the book, we have drawn characters of our children in their school uniform. So the children found this book very familiar because they see characters in their uniform. And through the book, we also hope that we can continue to use it as an extension of our appreciation to the many frontline workers, including our healthcare professionals. And hence, we wanted to invite children to have this opportunity to write, to draw notes, and we feature and highlighted some of these within the book itself, so that the children again see the children's voice, they get to see what their friends are drawing. And we know that our children will have read, will have seen news, we have heard from their parents about COVID, and from various sources, maybe even neighbors and so on. We want to make sure that facts are presented to them, so that they do not need to know everything and in the end become frightened, unnecessarily worried about the situation. But at the same time, we know that all children, all adults, all children, we want to be able to contribute. We want to be able to to mean something to the situation or to people around me. So we want to acknowledge the role of our young children and that they are not helpless. They can do a lot. They can do a lot for themselves. They can do a lot for their peers, their friends. They can also do a lot for the uncles and the aunties, the people that they meet around, through an approach like that. So we got them to write, we got them to draw, we got them to share what they want to say to many of the frontline workers. In fact, now we are working on a series of sharing for migrant workers as well. As you know, in Singapore today, we have a little situation where the migrant workers situation, COVID situation is concerned. So we wanted children to enter into that space to share their appreciation. And I think it is understandable to be anxious, right? Not just for children, even for adults. And how could any one of us not be anxious at this point of time? But we all know, as Mark kind of alluded to earlier, how parents manage their anxiety actually has a big impact on our children. Children are very attuned to us as adults or as figures around them. And we must be aware how we transmit to them messages, whether sublimely or very obviously. So that works for teachers, that works for parents. And you know, our children, they react to both what they are seeing and what they hear us say and how we are saying it to them. So our parents have been coming back to share with us that they like the e-reader because it allows them to share facts easily. It allows them to draw the children into the story very easily because they see familiar faces, they see familiar characters. And at the same time, how do they then gel, help the children to gel the differences that they are seeing, the changes in their lifestyle that they are seeing, both at the childcare centers and back home. For example, the need to wash hands often, the need to practice safe distancing. What does some of these mean for our children, both at childcare center and back at home? So that whole continuum of understanding is being established for our young children. The book is now being adapted by many of our international partners. It's in circulation now in Hong Kong, various parts of China, Japan, Denmark, and Australia and Canada. In fact, we have just created some audio versions of these so that we hope that we can help more children to read it, help more parents to be able to use it to share facts, to share important messages with our young children. Mark spent a lot of time talking about routines earlier and their ability to set up some structures for children. And for us, it's the same mental model to offer the sense of normalcy, to offer the sense of routine and connection for our children. We give a lot of efforts to developing high quality home-based learning because we know that the high quality home-based learning will help to support children, would help to support families in coping with potential anxieties of having to self-isolate. What would this mean for them? So we started preparing many series of all these home-based learning for all children, including infants. So the infants activities will have parents involved, creating little shakers to engage infants and so on. And these are presented in 4 different languages, especially in Singapore, and we have them across all 6 series. And we know that to better, support children with some of these adjustments, just now Mark ended by talking about a letter by grandparents or their grandparents can be writing to them. Actually, we have been doing some of these things as well. First, we know that we need to keep our children with some regular routines and schedules so that there is no big mismatch between what I used to do and a month later. And of course, we are quite careful now thinking about what if they have to go back to center, which is a month later for us in Singapore when circuit breaker measures ends. Does it mean another change again? So how do we keep this kind of predictability and a bit of that routine setting ready for our children? This is particularly important, right? Because we all know that consistency and structure would help us to stay grounded, help us to stay a bit calmer, especially during times like this, especially for young children, because imagine if they do not know what they're supposed to do when they wake up. They do not know what they can do, how they can do it. So in the top row, you will see this is one example from one of my childcare centers. What teachers did is that they did not want to assume that all parents know how to draw up a schedule, a meaningful one with children, right? So we do not want a lot of prose and text just being written and then stuck to the wall for the children. So the teachers actually prepared a short video to walk parents through what a good schedule can look like. What are the skills you can actually incorporate when getting children to prepare a schedule, whether it's numeracy, whether it's literacy. And in fact, one of the skills we want to teach early is actually the skill of planning. So in this case, you find that choice and planning are being incorporated for our young children, so that when working with their parents to decide on the schedule, they can actually decide, you know, that what time do I do this and for how long, and do I get to negotiate a little bit? I want a little bit of a physical locomotive time. Can I do that? And I think at this point of time, it's so important that parents do this with the children, because children needs the attention and needs the love and obviously expressed to them. And in the second part that you will see there, this is one of our favorite. We just tried it recently. Many of our children, they grew up in this digital world. Many of them would have never received really a snail mail card or a letter. Many of these are e-cards and virtual cards. So what the teachers and the whole team did was that they came together, they worked with the parents and told the parents, we're going to surprise your children. We're going to send out all these letters to them, and we want you to work with us. Go to the letterbox with your children, have them access the letters, watch for their responses, watch for their use of vocabulary. And that really, it's for us to look at how do we create this sense of connection and relationship, the sustaining of that relationship, that the child does not feel that now that I do not get to go to school, I have to stay at home. My teachers and friends could have forgotten me. I could have meant very little to the people that I used to spend a lot of time with. So we wanted to do this, whereby they received the letter. So you will find that these children, when pulling out the letter, it was quite cute that the moment they took the letter, they look at the envelope, and the first thing they told their parents is, wow, it has my name on it. How come it has my name? And it came in the mail. So even that whole experience brings a bit of happiness, a bit of joy for the children, because it has that little expectation, a little bit of that, you know, love that's been sent to them. So then the teachers would have handwritten, the English teachers and the mother tongue teachers, Chinese and so on, we have handwritten little notes to them. And now actually we're in the second phase where our children are the one writing back to their friends or writing back to their teachers. And I think one of the colleagues, if I'm not wrong, in the Q&A segment asked, what about young children? How do you then ensure that with this social distancing, how do we ensure that young children, like infants, the really, really young ones, are able to connect? So one of my centers did, if you look at the last row, is actually this simple activity where a teacher brought parents and babies through an activity they can do together. And by bringing all the parents together and all the babies together, suddenly there was this a strong assurance that we are in it together. We are helping each other. The teacher is also there giving us some tips how to do this better. So there are lots of ways, and it is not just about screen time. It's really using screen, if you like, more to project, to connect people, to bring everybody to the same space at the same time. And here I'll give you an example of a typical life lesson. I think many of you ask, you know, is it too much screen time and so on. So here you'll find that while we use the screen to connect all children, and children, I must say, they are very happy to see each other. In fact, one of the feedback we are getting a lot from parents today is that children misses their friends. So we want to make sure that we give more opportunity for them to see their friends on screen. And here you will find that this center actually used TinyTab. We are also an Apple-enabled childcare center, Apple Technologies. So using TinyTab, the teacher could create a whole series of learning, but yet at the same time, incorporating a lot of that other skill sets we want to see in our young children. For example, in this case, you will find that the teacher is trying to teach shapes. In teaching the shapes, the children get to move around their house to look for things that are in circle, the things that are in triangle, in squares, and so on. So combining what they're seeing on screen will be a whole series of physical activities that they get to do. So this is what we think is important here, to align technology with physical activities. I want to show you this just because of the boy. I was, because of today's topic, stress and anxieties. When we first did this, it was just really about learning by children, you know, getting them meaningfully engaged at home. Then we were told this little story by this boy. This boy told us that he wore his school uniform, although he did not have to because he was at home. He wore his uniform because he wanted to feel like he was in the childcare. He wanted to feel that he was with his friends. And I think that alone tells us that children need to know that my friends are with me and I can still see them. And that the whole little example of how he put on his school uniform just to attend a class like that where actually he's just taking the materials, going around the house, trying to look for things that sounded with the letters.
Yes.
He put on his uniform. And I think this tells us very, very clearly that he misses school, he misses his friends. In fact, just a while ago, a principal shared with me that a parent just shared with her that a child was having nightmare the whole of this week. And in that nightmare scene, the child is always shouting out for the teacher's name. So again, we know that there is this potential that while children may look happy at times, they do miss their normal way of living, which is going to centers, seeing their friends, seeing their teachers. So this is another example, because we wanted to share practical tips with participants so you can also use it. So again, sharing materials is quite important so that we can support families. So here you'll find that we have actually an entire YouTube channel with the various playlists. And we know that supporting families doesn't mean just home-based learning. It is also supporting holistic living for families. So you find that here we are also putting in things, having parents share resources, having our cooks sharing happy and nutritious meals for our children so that they can have healthy and nutritious meals at home. You'll find that lots of resources are being developed as part of the content crowdsourcing. People are sharing, and this whole ability of social learning, that people feel that, we have each other to depend on, we have each other to draw resources from, and of course the entire sense of pride and contribution. So here you also see examples of parents at home playing the role of teachers with the materials that we have shared with them. And I'd like to now hand the time to Connie. Connie will be speaking a little bit about the way curriculum content has been developed for young children during this period as well.
Okay, hi. Because the mother tongue is very important in Singapore, the books that children are familiar with, most important is the local context, Singapore local flavor. And I think this helped a lot of the parents at home that they don't speak the mother tongue, and really helpful for them to use these books to engage with the children. I don't think, because of the timing, if people are interested of all these books and resources, you can go to the YouTube My First Schools and you find many resources there.
So really that's the end actually of our presentation. I think like what Mark is saying, there's always silver lining behind the dark clouds. And for me, I feel, I'll just share with my colleagues earlier, it is such an important life chapter in the lives of our young children. Not everyone gets to go through life with such a crisis happening when we are that young. But from these pictures, you can see our young children being given opportunity to learn many, many new and important life skills, from tidying up, from learning how to fry an egg even at 5 years old. And we know that they would probably have learned many, many important life lessons. May not be well understood at this point, but we know that when they grow up, they will definitely, have that huge internalization about how they take care of not just themselves, but also people around them. So we'd like to wish everyone stay home, stay safe, and we will emerge from this stronger together. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ailing and Connie. That was wonderful, very informative, practical suggestions, on how, I'm going through the Q&As and the chat, and, a lot of questions are related to how we can actually help children express themselves better, how we can help them understand the situation. And I'm sure there is some clarity on how we can, help children do this. So now I would like to invite our the next presenter, Thiong, and so yes, he's there with us. Thank you so much, Thiong, and you have approximately 10 minutes. So over to you, Thiong.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, ARNEC, for having me here to present about the Plan International experience to coping with COVID-19. That's a Plan International. We have running 20 projects to serve about 50,000 children in Vietnam in holistic way. It means that one children in one family can receive different support like healthcare, nutrition, or school-based education, community-based education, child protection, gender-based violence, or economic empowerment for household. But COVID-19 is a different story because, although that in Vietnam we have experience from SARS since 2008, but COVID-19 is bring different trouble for us, from the health damage, from economic crisis and school closeouts and as a impact. So in this presentation, you can see that there is no complete formulation or lesson learned in this presentation. But I would like to present to you what Plan International Vietnam is doing to support children to cope with stress and fear. You will see the presentation will focus on listening to the voice of children. Also, the first and foremost important psychological and program effort. Situation of COVID-19 epidemic in Vietnam. We participate the game quite early. We have 2 patients since February. And fortunately, with the effective and strong control measure of Vietnam government, so far we have only 270 contact patients, in which 220 recover and no death. Few of 13 children contact with COVID-19. All of them recover, and none of them come from Plan International working side. However, us as a Vietnamese children, more than 50,000 children who are our intervention beneficiary are suffering from school closeouts since February, from strictly and totally social distancing. You cannot go out without an essential reason like seeking food or medication or emergency services. Then so be overwhelmed with continuous or threatening news on media. And online teaching have applied soon in March. However, the children in Plan International Vietnam side living in the mountainous area, so they are ethnic minority and very poor households, so very limited access to internet. In emergency like a COVID-19, normally we try the best to address the urgent need of target group as quick as possible. As a result, many our responding actions are designed based on our assumption rather than evidence. Additionally, with the travel restriction, most of us are working from home and can't reach out to the village to meet the children at their house and observing their living circumstance. Meanwhile, in psychological area, sometimes all we need is someone to listen to us. Therefore, Plan International Vietnam puts the listening to the voice of children at first, before two other important steps of developing appropriate communication and revising the ECD running programs. I'm very happy to hear on the master presentation, he mentioned about 3 big ideas about the observation, structure, and communications. And that 3 big ideas are focused on, from my understanding, individual child care perspective. But here in this presentation, we together will focus on the program perspective. And also in the Eileen presentation, she shared about the great experience that the children share the expression through the writing or drawing by e-reader or tablet. But in here in Vietnam, in the mountainous area, the children, the family, they don't have a such kind of machine. They have to access internet. So how we listen to them? We listen to children voice through 3 main channels. First, via Facebook competition for all the children of 20 projects of Plan Vietnam to post their feeling, painting, picture, and video clips describing the daily at-home activities at social distancing. Second, via the sponsorship letters, in which sponsorship children with the social will write about their concerns, what the fear and what they are and family are doing to get over the difficulty created by COVID-19 epidemic. The third one is a telephone surveys. Just plan staff and community volunteer. We call to select the children to ask about the status of the children in their village, on the nutrition, on health, on gender-based violence, sexual abuse, and child marriage situations. You know, that's the Facebook competition we call online contest in how diary. So posting on the Facebook mostly are lower secondary school students or older, while urban children, they show the better situation with learning, cooking, painting, or gathering with the family members. But some posts from mountainous adolescents show the situation of child marriage is emerging in the time of schools close. All of 32,700 of sponsorship children of Plan Vietnam are living in the mountainous area in ethnic minority communities. Not many of them have a smartphone or familiar with the social network. So that's why we ask community volunteer who living in this village come to guide them and support them and collect their material. You see in the picture that in each family we support to set up what called post office, so we can exchange material or paper with our contacts. A teacher do the same with exercise. So we provide them the form like this, so the children can write down what they're feeling and what their expectation. Some received letters. Children show that many of them working with the parent on the field or working housework at home. That's alarm us a risk of education dropout and child marriage. Either maybe helping the parent when the parent working in the field to be a baby sister, or practicing hand washing with the soap provided by Plan International Vietnam. For telephone survey, Plan International staff along with the community volunteer, we call to about the 50 selected children who are leader of the children club. And through the interview, we not only asking about their own feeling and status, but we also ask about the status of their friend in the village. They also tell us about what the government and social organization are doing to support the ethnic minority in COVID-19 prevention and resilience. You can see that most of them very fear of COVID-19 and they define COVID-19 with death, although it's not death yet in Vietnam. However, they get from news or TV that 1,000 people internationally die every day, and also most of them very feel boring, empty, until that they still can get out and hang around with a friend. Some either is more positive. They think that everything will be alright and they will come back to school. But all of them very miss school and classmates. So the finding from the voice of fear and stress is valuable inputs for us to develop the appropriate communication material and campaigns that best suit with their culture, their need, and accessible for people living in the most difficult circumstances. With the lockdown situation of children due to strictly social distancing and school closeouts, we focus more on digital, on audio communication products that can be easily transferred through the internet, mobile phone, television, or mobile loudspeaker. We also apply the experience from the COVID-19 to do something like launching a competition with the parents on toys making and convince them to make more time with their children. And we are developing several short humorous video clips for children and parents to guide about the COVID-19 prevention, about the online learning, house safety, preventing sexual harassment, or guide the parent to making toys to play with children with the local or recycled materials. We also develop leaflets and paper in COVID-19 prevention and responsive parenting in the pandemic time for the family who had to access to internet. So I will show you example leaflet for parents, named Parent in COVID-19 age. The first tip is you should use the time with the children, with a newborn baby, with young children, with the adolescents. And second is keep the positive behavior. And the third is build up the healthy behavior as well. And the fourth, how to deal with the children aggressive or naughty behaviors. And it's very important for parents is how to keep calm and how to control stress. And the last one is all together family members talking about COVID-19, listen and share and learn the new thing and try to understand each other. So listening to the voice of children also help us to redesign our running ECD program. We will be more focused on strengthening the hygiene promotion, ensuring the sufficient pregnant care, providing the micronutrient supplement product for pregnant, and breastfeeding women and children under 2 years old, according to the very important approach of 1,000 days. The school community-based education and teacher provide and collect the hard copy exercise via the post office, as you see from the previous pictures, and provides children with counseling and encouraging to come back to school after the epidemic, and the female and household economic empowerment. And after all, listening to the children respectfully, carefully, will help us to adapting our program and conducting our interventions better to help them to cope with stress and fear. It's what Plan International Vietnam are doing to support our children. Thank you very much to listen to our experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Theong. That was a wonderful presentation on the importance of listening to the children. And, we heard about in the earlier presentation about the importance of learning how for the children to express themselves. And now you are providing us very useful strategies. And I'm seeing the questions again. A lot of participants are asking, what are the other ways other than, online methods? And you've given us very good offline methods of reaching out to children. So I think that is really useful and it will solve a lot of queries from our participants. So thank you again, Theong. And our final presentation is by Nikki. So I would request Nikki to kindly start the presentation.
So good day, everyone. I am Nikki Reyes from the Philippines, and on behalf of the Early Childhood Care and Development Council, I will be presenting our office's efforts to support caregivers in the time of COVID-19. So before I show you the materials we've made for caregivers, I would just like to share with you the contexts in which these were developed. In the Philippines, the entirety of Luzon, as well as some areas in Visayas and Mindanao, have been on enhanced community quarantine since March 17. Consequently, classes have been suspended and work has been relocated to the home since. Meanwhile, our office, the ECCD Council, is mandated to oversee policies and programs for 0 to 4-year-old children. Moreover, the Council does not have any regional or local offices and cannot currently course messages through local governments as they are preoccupied with social assistance programs for the pandemic. With this, we decided to use Facebook to disseminate our materials as it has the highest audience and is accessible to everyone, even the lower socioeconomic classes. So just to understand where we were coming from, I've listed down some key points we based our decisions on in developing our materials. We do anticipate experiences of anxiety with children mainly due to these two factors: a major change in routines and the lack of transition. Second, parental anxiety. And among these two factors, we believe we will be better able to address the second. And once the second is addressed, we believe caregivers will be able to address the first for us. With that in mind, we've resolved to design our materials to give very concrete suggestions about what caregivers may be in control of at this time. To help lessen their anxieties, we try to make them focus on events and activities inside the home, rather than things outside the home that are out of their control. Next, we also want to encourage mindfulness over and participation in child development. We kept in mind that majority of parents in the Philippines are used to spending 8 to 9 hours at work every day, and then an additional 2 to 3 hours in traffic or tending to household chores. So the experience of having to spend a whole day with their children might feel very foreign to them, although I'm sure they also love it. So with our materials, we hope to help caregivers become more at ease and present in their child's development. So basically, we have two objectives in releasing our materials. First, we want to help create an environment of trust where children feel comfortable expressing how they feel and what they think. Because before we are able to process any thoughts or feelings experienced by children, we have to allow them the space, the time, and acknowledgement to express these first, verbally or non-verbally. Next, we want to remind parents that play is a tool they can use to get to know their children as individuals, including how their children express feelings in unique ways. We have to understand them in their unique normal state through frequent play interactions first before we are able to see any anxieties or fears our children may be experiencing. Apart from this, knowing the child as an individual allows us to best approach them when they feel anxious or afraid. So now I'm going to be showing you the first set of materials we released. So to boost awareness, they were patterned after a trending social media format, the bingo card. There is an individual card for certain age ranges, such as 0 to 6 months, 7 to 11 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years old. Each card has been released in 5 languages, namely English, Bisaya, Chavacano, Filipino, and Ilocano. Numbers under each translation of the bingo card indicate the organic reach the material has achieved over Facebook. So if we take a closer look at these cards, we see that the items found on them are a combination of developmental milestones and of activities caregivers can do with their child. Some activities are play-based, while some are focused on hygiene and sanitation to address some health needs in the time of COVID-19. These items hope to encourage caregivers to take a pause, observe their child, acknowledge what they've done together, and challenge them to try activities they haven't yet. Next, you will see our follow-up release poster on the left side of your screen that reads, Mga Activity para sa Pamilya, which translates to Activities for the Family. Now, the release of this material is accompanied by zoomed-in photos of each suggestion. So to your right, you will see an example of the top left suggestion on the original poster. This picture to your right suggests sumayaw or dance, and under that suggestion, we find variations of doing the activity depending on the age of the child, like at 0 to 6 months, carrying the infant while caregivers dance, at 7 to 12 months. When children are more mobile, caregivers can hold their hands while dancing with them. At 1 to 2 years, children are able to hold an object in each hand like a shaker while dancing. At 2 to 3 years, children are able to follow simple rules like moving when there is music and freezing all movements when the music stops. At 3 to 4 years, when children are more able to keep their balance, they can be asked to dance on smaller areas by folding a newspaper underneath them. So with this material, we are now trying to help parents understand the different ways to engage their children relative to their development. Now you are seeing 2 suggested activities from the poster of the previous slide. So I'm focusing on these 2 because these would be especially helpful in processing children's thoughts and feelings in this time. First, to your left, with the green banner, you will see magbasa ng libro, which translates to reading a book. So variations include at 0 to 6 months to choose short books, at 7 to 12 months to let the child point to pictures in the book that they are interested in or are curious about. When they do this, it is important to pay attention as this gives the caregiver a chance to practice listening to the child. And also, this allows us to treat the activity as an interaction rather than as a task. At 1 to 2 years, we let them choose the book they would like to read or be read to them. Such a practice encourages the child to take the lead and the caregiver to accept and respect choices by the child. This dynamic would make a good stepping stone towards an interaction when the child needs to confide in a caregiver. At 2 to 3 years, we recommend to listen to their questions about the story. We must pay attention to their questions as these may be inspired by experiences in real life but are easier to convey through stories they hear or characters they see in books. At 3 to 4 years, to let them create their own stories, because by creating their own stories, children are allowed the time and space to process their own thoughts and emotions by themselves. And when caregivers listen to these stories, they are given the opportunity to ask questions or encourage elaboration as to where the ideas on paper may have come from. In a similar manner, the picture to your right suggests magkwentuhan, or in English, talk to each other. This offers a great opportunity for both children and adults to open up to each other. So at 0 to 6 months, we suggest talking to the infant during daily routines like dressing up, bathing, eating, etc. Just make sure they're already part of a communication process, even if they can't speak yet. At 7 to 12 months, listening to them. Even when you don't understand what the words are, paying attention to children at this age will help you recognize familiar patterns in their speech and gestures when they are feeling happy, sad, anxious, afraid, excited, etc. At 1 to 2 years, we suggest waiting for them to respond and to finish talking before we talk. There's a need to exercise patience, especially since children are still only learning verbal language at this point. That being said, we also need to pay attention to nonverbal communication, like facial expressions and gestures, among others. At 2 to 3 years, it is essential to talk to them while they play, as some feelings may be better expressed through gestures or the use of toys rather than verbally for children. And at 3 to 4 years, we suggest conversing during activities with the entire family. This helps children see that feelings of anxiety and fear are experienced by everyone. It helps recognize a shared experience among family members that they may work through together. So with the interest that these materials have sparked, it's very encouraging to continue parent engagement efforts even after the community quarantine and the pandemic. In doing so, there must be an exploration of offline media as internet access is still very much an issue in the Philippines. We also look forward to the continuation of translating our materials to reach more families. And although these efforts have been a response to the pandemic, it is our hope that the parenting practices developed in this time are carried over into the new normal. This time has been very challenging but has also reawakened in all of us that parents truly should be supported as the children's primary caregivers and first teachers. Maraming salamat. Thank you po.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you so much. I think that gives a wrap to the whole, a comprehensive understanding of the whole thing. And a lot of our participants have been asking, we are talking a lot about children, but are we also looking at the caregivers and what kind of support that caregivers need during this time? And the idea of this bingo cards and the activities for family, I think they're really helpful for all of us. So I would now, it's been a very popular webinar right now because we had more than 270 participants who participated, and there are a number of questions. And we don't have time to take all of them, but rest assured, participants, that our experts and our panelists, they will reach out to you. They will answer all the questions but we don't have time to take all, but I would like to take one or two which this has been asked, has been for Mark, wherein a lot of participants are asking that you are talking about the socio-emotional development and the changes that are happening because of this pandemic and because of all the quarantine situation. So can you suggest certain ways in which we can support our which can provide some suggestions to the policy makers, wherein we can strengthen our systems for ECD. So this is for Mark. If
Yeah, this is an interesting question, which is very regional, of course, because we live in very different policy environments, in different economic environments. But I think there are some general principles which are important. In relation to this specific issue, I think trying to ensure that policies around early childhood development give children opportunities to discover themselves as social beings, to be in situations where they have time to play, time to express themselves in a structured and less structured way, but always in a scaffolded way and in a safe way. So different cultures have different conceptualizations of how that happens, and that's appropriate. That's what separates us to some extent, but it's important everywhere for children, and it will be doubly important post-COVID to ensure that we have environments, times, places, or that through our institutions, our schools, our preschools, that children have time to build up the skills that can only be built up through practice and use. Not just through a lot of these skills don't come from teaching. You can't teach a 4-year-old how to be socially and emotionally aware. They have to be in environments where they're encountering other people, dealing with real situations. And it does go better when we can somewhat scaffold that and make sure that children can do that in a safe way and in a way that we can put some wraparound in terms of helping them process what's going on. But they can't, there's no shortcut, there's no book we can give them or lecture we can provide which will give them those skills. They need spaces and time to do those things. So our policies should respect those aspects of early childhood, and perhaps we should have additional focus on that in this post-COVID world.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think another question which has come across in the chat box and the Q&A box is, what about the disadvantaged families and children from the disadvantaged and poorer families? So how do we reach out to them? What are the strategies that we need to, Thiong had mentioned a few strategies of reaching out to children. So if you can throw a little more light on how this can further be, children from disadvantaged backgrounds can be reached out and be helped during this situation. Thiong, if you would like to answer that.
Yeah, I would like to say about experience. As we support for a project in Kuwait City, it's a very big city. There's a lot of children there living on streets, and they are living to sell things for the tourists. And that when tourists lockdown, so every stop, and the children and their family don't have any income. So it's a very difficult circumstance. And the first thing that we try to immediately respond for that situation is we provide them the food, with price and with very certain foods for them, so they can have enough food, sufficient food for daily. And then second is they somehow have to get out, although that is a social distancing is very strictly, but they should to get out to find a way to get the income. So we provide them some material for protect for themselves, like mask or swab or something. And with the young children, the 2 years old or 5 years ago, we still maintain our interventions that we provide them, with nutrition supplement products that and not only for them, for the children, also for their pregnant woman and breastfeeding woman as well, because we know that nutrition for the mother is so important for the baby as well. So it's like a very basic need that we immediately have to respond for them. And then, we hope that from the leaflet, from the video clip or something we are developing, we will somehow to help the parent to learn about the new way to cope with the situation and to communicate about the COVID-19 and also to be more positive about the situation. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Theong. Thank you so much. And I think we have time for just, I think, one more question for our Singapore team. Ailing and Connie, if, a lot of questions and queries related to the new normal. And right now the schools are closed, the childcare centers are closed. But when we open this lockdown, children start coming back to the schools or the childcare centers. So how do the school systems prepare for this? Any insights into that would be nice.
I think what has happened over this period of time is that many of the measures are actually incrementally put in place. They are not from a sudden surge of actions. So our children actually, before they have to stay home all the way, they have been given small little steps, eventually, ending in this stay at home. And now even at staying at home, our teachers are in contact with them regularly and their friends as well. And we try to make sure the day schedule, in a sense, mirrors what they have been doing so far in centers, so that it doesn't create that extreme, huge difference in experiences. Although, yes, physically, they are not able to see each other. And now we are working actually on a transition kit that we want to put in some of these resources to help our children return to centers. We're working on it, but giving it a lot of attention around the social emotional readiness for them to come back again, to be in big groups again. And really, even with the schools opening up again, we really don't know what kind of measures we still have to continue. For example, the safe distancing may still have to happen within the centers. So we are also watching the situation and responding, and by observing as well what the children are showing signals to us and what parents are also sharing with us. Yeah, so that kind of, it's always work in progress for us. Yeah.
Can I add something? I think as a group, because I think we are very strong in our, even though our network is very weak, 145 centers, but I think that because of common resources, we have one common resources, and at the same time, I think each centers, they also presented their own learning resources like short video clips to the children. So at least the children at this time or point, they connect back with the teachers. So I think that is very important to prepare them to go back to schools, hopefully in June. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for to all our panelists and our experts for the wonderful presentations. And over to Evelyn. So over to you, Evelyn.
Thank you, Nilima, and thank you once again to all our presenters and our attendees for a very engaging and informative session. I have to say that all the presentations are really very powerful. But before we close our webinar, just some reminders from our end. Please respond to the webinar evaluation form that we will be sending to you after this session. This will really help us, improve the delivery of our webinars. So please, if you can spare a bit of your time to send us your feedback for today's webinar. The next webinar, webinar number 4, which will be held on May 12, would be about distance learning approaches for young children during COVID-19. In this webinar, we will explore the importance of ensuring that young children are still provided with learning opportunities, even in the confinement, of their homes. So we will look at some practical examples as well. I hope you'll be able to join us in that in the next webinar. Third, we have consolidated COVID-19 and ECD resources in our website, and we also share it through our through FB and Twitter. Please take a look at those resources, that this might really help you in terms of designing and redesigning your programs. Last, we want to encourage everyone to take a bit of your time to respond to the survey, which we have launched just last week. It is a survey which will help us determine the impact of COVID-19 on young children and early childhood development in the Asia Pacific region. So as ECD advocates, and champions, your views are very important. So if you can please respond to this survey, and then please share it as well with your own network. So that's all the reminders from our end. And again, thank you so much for attending this webinar. We hope to see you next time. Next week for the next webinar. So stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.